Hey, what's up everybody? Hope you guys are doing pretty good. So today, we're going to look at some interesting cases of extreme human longevity, and I want to give some thoughts on the matter of what may be responsible for this and even go over some reasons that this information would be suppressed. If we type in oldest human or the average lifespan, we find that the oldest factual account given by the mainstream is 122 years. If we look at the average lifespan of a human, we find that we're told it's 70 years and that this is due to modern medicine, right? They tell us that the ancients only lived to their late 30s or 40s and that even just 200 years ago, the average lifespan was 35. Yet, is there another reason that they tell us this information? Let's just start off by asking that question because it's interesting. There's a newspaper from the early 1900s speaking of a man who lived to be 256 years old. Many of you may have heard this story, but we will cover other accounts as well that are not accepted by the mainstream. And with that, let's get started. On May 6, 1933, the New York Times published a report on a man named Li Ching-Yuen. The title starts with Li Ching-Yuen dead, giving his age at 197. But inquiry put age at 256. Notice how there aren't any fact checkers in this article trying to debunk this whole narrative. As it reads, Li Ching-Yuen, a resident of Kaisen in the province of Sichuan, who contended that he was one of the world's oldest men and said he was born in 1736, which would make him 197 years old, who died today. A Chinese dispatch from Chongqing telling of Mr. Li's death said he attributed his longevity to peace of mind and that it was his belief that one could live at least a century by attaining inward calm. Compared with estimates of Li Ching-Yuen's age in previous reports from China, the above dispatch is conservative. In 1930, it was said Professor Wu Chung-Chang, Dean of the Department of Education in Minkuo University, had found records showing Li was actually born in 1677 and that the Imperial Chinese government congratulated him on his 150th and 200th birthdays. A correspondent of the New York Times wrote in 1928 that many of the oldest men in Li's neighborhood asserted their grandfathers knew him as boys and that he was then a grown man. According to the generally accepted tales told in his province, Li was able to read and write as a child by his 10th birthday and had traveled in Kansu, Shaanxi, Tibet, Annam, Siam, and Manchuria gathering herbs. For the first 100 years, he continued at this occupation. Then, he switched to selling herbs gathered by others. Wu Peifu, the warlord, took Li into his house to learn the secret of living to 250. Another pupil said Li told him to keep a quiet heart, sit like a tortoise, walk sprightly like a pigeon, and sleep like a dog. According to one version of Li's married life, he had buried 23 wives and was living with his 24th, a woman of 60. Another account, which in 1928 credited him with 180 living descendants comprising 11 generations. Now, there is some info that they're leaving out of this. According to one of Li's disciples, he said that Li had actually met an even older man who was the age of 500 years old. This man of 500 years is actually the one who taught him Qigong exercises and dietary recommendations that would help him extend his lifespan to superhuman proportions. We know that Li was an herbalist and had an herb-rich diet, and in a 1920s interview, he expressed the key to longevity was as simple as following a formula of living off a diet of goji berries, Chinese herbs, and rice wine, while of course, practicing Qigong. Notice how there's a connection between a very light diet of live conscious foods, berries, herbs, and no mention of any meats or animal products, so let's just keep that in mind as it'll be a common theme. Another essential part of this is Qigong, so it's essential that we cover that. Qigong is the practice of harnessing your Qi or life energy, also known as Qi, Aura, Chakra, Prana, and even Nen. Essentially, Qigong is an ancient Chinese exercise and healing technique that involves meditation, controlled breathing, and movement exercises. Many in the modern day would think it's quite silly, but it's simply because this practice belongs to another age. The ancient Chinese may very well have got it from previous cultures such as the Druids. They had a similar concept of qi called nuivra, and as we know, they had a great affinity towards trees. One of the main foundations of Qigong is tree Qigong, or the art of becoming like a tree. The basic principle of tree Qigong is that trees are the guardians of our realm. They take what are toxins from other life forms and feed on it, transforming it into useful products for our reality. Every form of life or matter energy also has an energy field around it to some extent. Energy radiates out in all directions from each being, just getting fainter as it gets further away from its central source. This means that beyond our perception, these energy fields interact and blend to a certain extent, influencing each other. As we practice Qigong over a period of time, we can begin to feel this field of energy emanating from us. This feeling of qi is first between our hands. As we begin to develop our Qigong and increase our own qi and awareness of it, our vitality increases and our qi shines brighter and stronger. So essentially, by controlling his diet, making it extremely light for the body to process while also being detoxifying, and by implementing spiritual vital energy exercises into his daily routine, it's possible to reach a state of harmony within the body that will lead to extreme human longevity. You see, we find this so hard to believe in the modern day because people have become used to eating 3 meals a day, or by eating too many toxic and undigestible foods such as meat, that many people aren't really willing to let go of that reality, and so of course they denounce this as just a made-up tale. Interestingly enough, there are many more accounts of humans with great old age. Again, from the New York Times, July 11th, 1913, there was a piece called History's Oldest Man. In the records of the parish of San Leonardo in Shoreditch, London, it appears that on January 22nd, 1588, Thomas Cam, or Carn, was buried at the age of 207 years. Zaro Aga, a Kurdish man who claimed birth on February 16, 1764, and died on June 29, 1934, in Istanbul, Turkey, at the alleged age of 170. Javier Pereira was a Zenu Indian from Colombia who was reputedly over 160 years old at the time of his death. Although his death is variously said to have been in 1955, 1956, and 1958, sources all claim that he was born in 1789. In the Gerontologist, Volume 10, the USSR people lived longest in the Caucasus and the Pamirs. The oldest man is Shirali Mislimov, 165, and the oldest woman, Ashura Amararova, 195. Long life is apparently related to various factors which exist in Dagestan. This one is really interesting. In the European Magazine and London Review, Volume 25 from 1808, it says, quote, "Amongst the letters intercepted in the Spanish packet brought into Scotland is one which comes from Cordova in the Tucumán in South America, and it mentions that a black woman named Luisa Truxo is now living there aged 175 years. In the book Human Longevity by Easton James 1799, there are several accounts of old age, including Lywar Chen, a Welsh bard who lived to 150 and died in 500 AD. Thomas Parr of Winnington, Shropshire, who lived to 152 and died in 1635. Henry Jenkins of Ellerton, who lived to be 169 years old and died in 1670. Peter Torden, a Hungary peasant who lived to be 185 and died in 1724. Another interesting story is about Frederikus Gualdus, author of Revelation of the True Chemical Wisdom, lived in Venice in the 1680s. His age was reported in a letter in a contemporary Dutch newspaper to be over 400 years. It was well known that he was a practicing alchemist. Now keep in mind that most of these that we just presented are documented but unverified according to the mainstream narrative. Yet, we haven't even begun to dive into the myths and legends of a variety of different cultures. From China, Fu Qi is a cultural hero in Chinese legends credited with the creation of humanity and the invention of music. He lived to 197 years old. Lucian, an ancient Greek satirist, who wrote about the Saris, a Chinese people claiming they lived for over 300 years. Zhuo Qi, a legendary figure of the late Eastern Han Dynasty. It is believed that he had existed before the collapse of the Han Dynasty, and it is claimed that he lived until the age of 300. He learned his magic and path to longevity from the Taoist sage Feng Heng, and eventually passed his arts to Ji Xuan. Peng Zhu is a legendary long-lived figure in China. He supposedly lived over 834 years in the Shang Dynasty. Some legends say that 1 year was 60 days in ancient China. That made him more than 130 years old. Others say he was over 200 years old or over 400 years old. In Egypt, the Egyptian historian Manetho, drawing upon earlier sources, begins his Egyptian king list with the Greco-Egyptian god Hephaestus, who was the king for 9,000 years. In Irish lore, a crone is an old woman or supernatural human that can live up to 300 years. They're so old that they have feathers growing at the back of their heads. In Greece, a book, Macrobi, Long Livers, is a work devoted to longevity. It lists 3 main extreme cases. Here's a quote from the book. Quote, "I give you the men who are related to have attained great age with a sound mind and a perfect body. Some profit may accrue to you from the treatise in 2 ways. On the one hand, encouragement and good hopes of being able to live long yourself, and on the other hand, instruction by examples. If you observe that it is the men who have paid most attention to the body and mind that have reached an advanced age and full health. Nestor, you know, the wisest of the Achaeans, outlasted 3 generations, Homer says, and he tells us that he was splendidly trained in mind and in body. Likewise, Tiresias, the seer, outlasted 6 generations. Tragedy says, and one may well believe, that a man consecrated to the gods, following a simpler diet, lives very long." Notice how he mentions how a simpler diet is crucial to living long. So, we have Tiresias, the blind seer of Thebes, who lived over 600 years. Nestor, who lived over 300 years. And then the Ceres people, as we mentioned, but he says in the book, quote, "Indeed, there are even whole nations that are very long-lived, like the Ceres, who are said to live 300 years. Some attribute their old age to the climate, others to the soil, and still others to their diet, for they say that this entire nation drinks nothing but water." Now, we have to keep in mind that most of our knowledge of the ancient world was destroyed during the destruction of the great libraries. Of course, we have the famous Herodotus, the Greek historian who claims, quote, "The oldest inhabitants of Greece, the Pelasgians, who came before the Dorian, Ionian, and Elean migrations, inhabited Arcadia and Thessaly, possessing the islands of Lesbos and Lacomanus, which were full of orange groves. The people with their diet of dates and oranges lived on an average of more than 200 years. This was also confirmed by the Greek poet Hesiod, who said, quote, "The Pelasgians and the people who came after them in Greece ate fruits of the virgin forest and blackberries from the fields." Plutarch, the Greek biographer, observed, quote, "The ancient Greeks, before the time of Lycurgus, ate nothing but fruits." Supposedly, Pythagoras, one of the wisest of the ancient sages, is credited with being the father of mathematics, modern astronomy, philosophy, and the other sciences. He was perhaps the greatest of all Greeks, and his fare was almost entirely fruits. Much of our history indicates that our ancestors were fruitarians, but history books today omit or falsify our past and our fruit-eating nature. Most religions have their origins in sun and tree-worshipping cults. Apollo is the god of the apple tree. Avalon means the fabled island of apples. The Garden of Eden was an orchard. Its walls corresponded with the ancient paradisa, or walled orchards. These walls kept the orchards intact from animals and retained the day's heat to protect against the night's chill. There really are countless legends of extreme human longevity from all cultures, and when you consider the claims made by certain religions, such as in Vedic literature, the Bible, and many others, it really makes you begin to think that this whole story that we're only meant to be an average lifespan of 75, or that 200, 300 years ago people only lived to their mid-30s, is but an attempt to suppress our true ancestry. they don't want people to live this long for sure, as this is how wisdom is passed through generations. One who experiences multiple generations would have almost infinite time to gain vast knowledge. This allows for more skills and more arts to be mastered, and this can be passed on to future generations. Not only that, but think about it. The elite don't want us to know that it's possible to live to 300 or even longer, for not only is this the harmony of the human body and the mastery of your vital energies, but this could literally change someone's perspective of the reality they live in, for living this long is somewhat supernatural, hence why they deny its existence. But I don't know, you tell me, do you believe it's possible to live past 200? Personally, I know it in my heart, as it's made very clear through the ancient texts that by eating a healthy diet, having a calm mind, and by harnessing and balancing your own spiritual power, you can achieve a long-lasting life. But with that, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Also, come check out our Insta and send us a message if you want to talk with us or share some thoughts, maybe show us some findings that you may have, and even check out our website if you have time. Stay curious, and all we can hope is that our minds may be unveiled.
Let go of everything you think to be true. Relax the mind and ask the question, do I truly understand what this reality is?